Hey, what's up? This is Ill Factor from beatacademy.com. Super glad you're here. I want to share some music production tips and techniques while recreating the beat in Flume's Never Be Like You. Now, I'm going to be sharing a snippet and some highlights from my Producing EDM course, where there's a whole module that I go into great detail about producing future bass. And this snippet, this video I'm about to show you, comes from that module. My Producing EDM course goes into great details about producing house, future bass, drum and bass, and much more. So if you want more details about this course, and it's currently open right now, then visit beatacademy.com/EDM. Without further ado, let's dive right in. So what we're trying to do throughout this whole course is gravitate towards what are some of the common characteristics? What are some of the nuances that I can identify from the many different genres or subgenres in dance music? And then how do I take those nuances and apply them to my own productions? That's what this whole thing's about. This is exactly how you sound like Flume. Because what would be the point of that if at the end of the day, you're just replicating something? You want to be inspired by it, unlock the mystery of how to acquire that sonic fidelity or the nuances that artist is placing on their style, and then use your influences to guide your artistic creative output when creating your music. So I'm going to focus on the drums. And one thing in particular I'm going to be using as a reference here is a song that Flume has produced called Never Be Like You. Love this tune. It's a great vibe. So let me just play a little bit of the reference. A lot of what we're hearing in some of the Flume's production and in the drum programming in particular is this looseness. It's this vibing off the grid. It's not as rigid. And so that's something that might need to challenge, you might need to be challenged on, and nudging and taking the extra time to see the effects of moving things off the grid. And so what I'm talking about is, if you looked at these notes here, we want to make sure that we're nudging stuff off. Things are a bit loose. Experimenting with timing, placements, velocities, and things like that. So I want to start with a plugin that I've been using a lot recently, and that's XO by XLN Audio. One thing before we even start sequencing, something that has been really cool and encouraging to me is actually processing the drums while I'm actually working on it. If I play you this pattern, it's cool, but it's like it's still sleeping, and I would just need it to wake up. And so what I like to do a lot of times is place processing on my drums, on the complete drum bus, and it totally affects the way I'm going to perform it. If I'm triggering it with my drums, so let's say I have Ableton Live Push here, or my MIDI controller, it's all right. But if I want a little bit more oomph and some juice to inspire me, I definitely want to use some processing on top of the plugin. So I'm going to be using the Fuzz Plus 3 by Audio Damage. Highly recommend that you download this. It's a free plugin, so it's a gem, and it's got a unique tone to it. And so it works all across any DAW. So we'll turn this on, just give a little bit of distortion, and yeah, that's the grid I need, right? Yeah. That inspires me right away, as opposed to no plugin. Yeah, right? And especially if you don't have any monitors or loudspeakers that we're just hitting one deep kick drum, we're like, whoa. And that's really the case with having studio monitors. You get that sense of power from the volume. So here's this pattern, and it's just kind of I'm mirroring the same pattern that we heard in our reference, and I've got a little bit of layering. So we've got the kick drum here, we've got that regular snare, and we've got this nice little knock that I like, and I'm just lightly nudging that over so we get like a little flam, as opposed to just keeping it here. I like that. And it's loose. And that's what you want to go for when you're trying to create this. It's a really cool vibe to just loosen up the drums a little bit and not have it as stiff and on the grid. This is especially helpful if you're just double clicking and you're placing your drums directly on your grid. That means if you're step recording, right? So you can just slightly move them off the grid, whichever command you would need to do that in your DAW, and that's going to help you get more of a loose humanistic feel to it. Now it's all about adding character and life to a drum pattern, right? Because it's pretty straightforward. When you find out the beat, it's not going to be typically that complicated. We've got a simple, straightforward beat, the kick on the 1, the snare is on beat 3, and that could change and you can come up with something clever. But yet you can come and stumble across some really cool happy accidents when experimenting with drum patterns and having that pattern trigger a drum break or something like that. So we have this basic drum pattern here. And there's a big gap here between that kick and that snare drum because there's a lot of rhythmic movement happening with the synth, as we can hear with that gated synth that we can hear in the reference. But I want to encourage you, try doing this, and this could be a really cool, exciting thing for you to stumble across some really cool ideas. So what I would normally do is use a gate on a loop that will be triggered from the regular drums to do some really cool stuff. So let's put this in an example. Let's create an audio track. So it would be audio 3. Let's paint it this color here. And let me just browse through some loops. So go through here. Yeah, that sounds cool. I'm just looking for something that's got some movement, ambience. This is fine. Okay, so let's bring that in here, right? And it should be in tempo. Okay. And then what I'll do is I'm going to go to my audio effects and we're going to go over to use a gate plugin. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm having the main foreground beat, the drums, the kick, the snare. We're going to have the kick trigger this gate so that it only allows the loop to be heard once the kick is being played. And that is sidechaining. So we go inside the gate, sidechain option, and choose XO. Now I haven't separated my kick, snare, and stuff like that from the XO plugin, so I can use the EQ function on my sidechain to say anything from 200 or 195 hertz and below, use that frequency to sidechain the gate plugin. So now we're getting some really cool rhythms here. And depending on how you adjust the hold and release, you can get some really cool, unique responses. So yeah, just kind of previewing them, see what feels good. Now another thing too is they're all locked into the time. So what I want to do is in Ableton Live is just play this twice as slow and then set the warping algorithm from beats to repitch. And this is going to pitch the loop down so that it fits the tempo that I'm currently in. We get a really cool response. I'll take the gate off. So you get really cool. When you pitch these loops down, the texture is so cool. Now gate it. And let's just have the drums. So maybe I want an extra hit, just raise the hold up. Like that. You can hear a little bit of that. I can raise the noise floor so it's... Yeah. We can even sidechain with the compressor. Let's go over here, compressor, right after that. Same thing, we'll do the XO, we'll do the EQ, so that it's actually gonna duck it. Different than the gate, because the gate is just going to allow you to hear the loop, but the sidechain is now gonna push it down at the same time, so. Then what I could do is to make it a little bit more, give it some dimension and space. I have here on return track B, I've got a delay plugin, I think the repeater here. And what I like to do is time my delay. I'll put a stereo delay and I take it off sync and I put it in millisecond mode, right? and it'll send a lot of it. And let's link it so that they're both left and right in a. And that alone is super cool to do for some effects. Okay, so I'll keep it right about there. I unlink it and then change, I'll make sure that the left and right are in different times. Okay, and then maybe shorten that up a little bit. And then just dial back the amount that I'm sending to that. So what we're listening to when we hear the reference, it's got a buzzy type of sound. So I'm immediately going to start with our sawtooth here for our first oscillator. Now, what's cool about this particular synth and serum is that the unison engine here, the way how they create multiple voices or adding more detuning voices, is, you can crank this up and already immediately get a great result. So here is the synth. So that's just with one voice. Very thin, but as you start to create a larger number of unison voices, you get that nice wide super saw effect. Then you can blend between the original and the detuned voice or the unison voices. So we'll start there. And then we'll mirror the same thing here in oscillator B, but we're going to choose an analog basic shape. So we're going to start with our sine wave, and this is going to get a little bit smoother. And we'll add some unison here as well. That adds that nice little, almost like a dull whistle, like a nice, really cool vibe. Let's try bringing this down an octave. Why? Well, because I want it to actually cover a lower frequency range, and this is going to add some nice bottom end to oscillator A. So oscillator A handles a lot of that buzzy in the high end. Oscillator B is going to handle a lot of the low, mids, and lows. Okay, now let's route both of these oscillators to the filter here. So I might want to go an octave lower here. Raising the resonance up a little bit. Now, I also want to make sure, right now I'm only routing oscillator A to the filter, so let's make sure we're also routing oscillator B. You can add on top of that some noise, which will add some nice crispy noise at the end, at the higher register. And make sure that we're filtering that as well. And add a sub oscillator. All these things are just really adding to the overall tone of the sound. Sub oscillator is technically your third oscillator that you can add, and you can determine the sub octave, an octave lower, 2 octaves lower. And this is a great way to add some low end to the already existing tone that we've created. Okay, so it's a good start there, and that's where we're going to leave it for right now. And what I want to do is focus on the main characteristic here, which is the gated part of the synth. Now, there's so many different ways to do that, so I want to cover a couple that might be useful to you. The first thing I want to do is create, well, this has a gate, so there's an actual sequence or a pattern of the synth. Notice that when I'm playing the synth alone, it's just the chords that are being held. I'm going to talk about chords and how to come up with some unique chords that can express some emotive features to your songs. We'll get to that later. Right now, know that these are just the chords being sustained all the way through. So they're getting a 4 count and 2, 3, 4. And so they're just being sustained all the way through each measure. Now, what I want to do is disrupt that by creating a rhythmic pattern. So similar to what we did with the drums, this is where I'm going to involve a gate, okay? Now, the gate will only let sound be heard once it passes the threshold, right? That's that blue line. So we could sidechain the gate, once again, similar like what we did with the drums. We can have something else trigger the gate so that it opens and closes at a specific rate. So here, I'm going to sidechain this gate, and I'm going to choose this instrument, analog. Let me solo that, and that's what we have right here. So I just use a separate instrument, an analog in this case, and I like using the analog. It's a synth because I can actually shape the length and the overall body. Therefore, I can actually shape the way the gate will open and close. So what I decided to do was create a rhythm. Here is the actual rhythm. So that's just the rhythm. And it could be any note. I just picked a random note and actually played in the rhythm or drew it in. And that's what we're doing, because we're trying to create a rhythm that'll allow the gate to open and close. So keep that rhythm in mind, right? And remember, I can go to the amp envelope and open the release. And how you shape the overall tone and the actual envelope, the amp envelope, will determine how the gate reacts. Head back over to the synth, right? Now let's unmute this analog because we don't want to hear it. So I'm basically just muting this track. I don't want to hear the analog. I simply want the rhythm to trigger the gate. So I'm going to go into the gate, hit sidechain, choose analog. And now what we should get is the rhythmic pattern that I created on the analog triggering this gate. So if I extend this note, that'll extend how much the gate will be open. So I hope that makes sense. And now what we can do here is mess around with the parameters in the gate to determine how it's going to react. So we've got I brought up the attack a little bit, because when there's a really quick attack, you're going to get a little bit of that clicking and popping. You can extend the hold, right? So more hold means that the gate will hold itself open a lot longer. We don't want that. We want a nice distinct rhythm. So you want to change these parameters till it feels just right. And so this is a way of using a gate with something else triggering this gate to create a unique, distinct type of rhythm, while the synth is really just holding on to chords. All right, I'm also going to use a compressor after that, sidechain it to our kick drum. So what I've done is, in the drums, I went ahead and took the time to just export the sounds from XO. I simply just went to the kick and routed it. I said, I want you to go out of outputs 1, bus 1. And I just created an audio track set to input monitoring. I chose to grab the input from the XO and bus 1. And now my kick drum is got its own dedicated audio track. So the kick drum will now affect the compressor. So we have to now we can head back into the serum and tweak this a little bit. Now we can go into the effects part here and give a little bit of some saturation. So we'll go to the tube. Add some chorus to this. And some space here with some reverb. And now what I want to do is widen this up a lot, and that's what we hear when we hear the reference. Let me go back to it's a little bit deeper, right? So R's could get a little bit. That's what I meant by deeper, meaning it's not as thin and bright. So I'm going to bring it down here. Now to layer that synth path that we just created, let's add our bass synth underneath that. So for that, I'm going to be using Ableton Live's wavetable, and we're getting just a deep kind of Reese type of bass. And that is basically getting two sawtooth waveforms, and we're going to slightly detune one from the other, giving us this result here. So oscillator 2 will be detuned slightly. And under the unison, we're going to choose noise. Without any unison, you get that. And we can add a little bit of noise unison here. And then we're simply just going to bring the frequency cutoff down and just play the bass line at a lower octave, which should sound like this. So let's go ahead now and layer that together with the gated synth. Adding some filter drive to the sound. You see how the bass is moving a little bit left to right, and that's the unison working, and that's what's giving that nice extra width to the bass. Well, hey, thank you so much for watching this video. As I mentioned in the intro, this is just a couple of the highlights and snippets from Producing EDM course, which I even go into greater detail in producing this specific song from Flume and others in the genre of future bass. And so my Producing EDM course covers producing house, drum and bass, future bass, and much more. And there's even some great interviews in there from Grammy Award winning producers and engineers to help kind of shape and mold the sound that you're looking for. Even if you're not working or producing EDM, taking the techniques and the tips that I shared throughout this course can be a huge asset and help you in implementing some of those tips and techniques into your current workflow, no matter what music that you are producing. So it's currently right now open for enrollment. So just go ahead and visit beatacademy.com/EDM for more information. Be sure to subscribe and like this channel, and I'll see you next time.